The Duke of Ravenscroft looked at Cordelia's offered hand as though she had held out something spoiled, and then he turned his broad shoulders and walked away from her. He did it in front of everyone. That was the part that would be repeated by morning, not the refusal itself, for men refused to dance often enough. But that he had let her hand hang there in the candlelit air for the length of 3 heartbeats before he moved, so that the whole of Lady Marchbanks's summer ball had time to see the offered glove, the waiting fingers, and the wide indigo back of the man declining them. Cordelia felt the heat of 200 candles press against the nape of her neck. Somewhere behind her the orchestra had faltered on a phrase, a single violin holding its note a beat too long, uncertain, and in that suspended hush she understood that the room had stopped breathing on her account. She did not lower her hand in a hurry. That would have looked like flinching, and she had promised herself, at some point in the last 4 years, that she would never again let a crowded room watch her flinch. Instead, she let the fingers fold inward slowly, as though closing around something she had decided, on reflection, to keep. Then Miss Cordelia Blythe sank into the deepest, most flawless curtsy the Ton had seen that season. She went down like water finding its level, amber silk pooling around her, spine straight, chin neither proud nor bowed, her whole body a single unbroken line of courtesy offered to a back that was no longer there to receive it. It was the curtsy one gave to royalty. It was the curtsy her mother had drilled into her across the cold floor of a country parlour, over and over, until grace became a thing the body did without permission. She held it. She held it a moment past what was necessary, so that every dowager along the gilt chairs and every gentleman at the card-room door might see precisely how a lady answered cruelty, with more manners than the man who had earned none. The silence that followed had a texture. Cordelia could feel it on her bare arms, cool despite the July heat, like the drought that lives at the bottom of a stairwell. And into that silence, she heard it distinctly. Because the room was too quiet not to hear it, the Duke of Ravenscroft stopped walking. She rose. She did not look at him. She looked at the middle distance, at the shivering prisms of the great chandelier, and she kept her breath even. But she heard the change in his stride. 6 steps he had taken away from her, hard and even on the parquet. And then a 7th that landed wrong, that hesitated, that came down half-finished, the boot heel setting on the floor and lifting again, as though the man wearing it had forgotten, mid-motion, where he had meant to go. A woman near the pianoforte made a small sound behind her fan. Cordelia turned toward the terrace doors. She would leave the floor now, walking, not fleeing, and she would find her aunt, and she would drink a glass of ratafia she did not want. And she would survive this the way she had survived the loss of the house and the sale of her mother's harp and every other small dismantling of her life, by refusing to let anyone see it land. She had gone perhaps 4 steps when the Duke said her name. Not Miss Blythe, her name. Cordelia, low, rough, torn out of him, a single word that carried the length of the ballroom in the dead hush, and struck her between the shoulder blades like a hand. She stopped, because her body stopped her. Her feet simply refused the next step. Around her the Ton drew one collective, delighted breath. A duke did not use a young lady's Christian name across a public ballroom. A duke did not use it at all unless they were betrothed, or unless he had gone entirely out of his senses. And this duke, this cold, correct, untouchable man, whom 3 seasons of hopeful mothers had failed to so much as ruffle, had just said it in a voice that shook. Cordelia turned around. The Duke of Ravenscroft stood in the center of the cleared floor where the dancers had been, and he looked like a man who had walked into a wall he had not seen. He was young for his title, 8 and 20, no more, though he wore his consequence like armor a decade older, and tonight the armor had a crack running through it that anyone with eyes could follow. His jaw was tight. One hand had come partway up from his side, the fingers open, and he seemed unaware of it, the way a man is unaware of his own heartbeat until something frightens it. His dark hair had fallen loose across his brow, and his eyes, grey and fixed on her with an intensity that made the 200 candles seem suddenly insufficient. His eyes were the eyes of someone drowning who has just seen, too far off to reach, the one plank that might have saved him. "Cordelia," he said again, quieter, and this time it was almost a question, almost an apology, almost a plea. For the space of a breath, the whole glittering apparatus of the ton, the fans, the feathers, the diamonds, the card tables, the gossips already composing their letters, the whole of it fell away, and there were only the two of them standing at opposite ends of a silence, and something enormous and unspoken lay in the parquet between them, like a chasm neither had known was there. Then the Dowager Duchess of Ravenscroft rose from her chair. Cordelia did not see her rise so much as feel the room's attention swing, like a compass needle, toward the far wall. The old woman was magnificent in slate-grey satin, and a collar of pearls the size of quail's eggs, and she was beautiful still, in the way of a marble effigy, cold, exquisite, and utterly without mercy. She did not hurry. She crossed the floor to her grandson with the unhurried certainty of a woman who has never in her life been asked to wait, and she laid one gloved hand upon his sleeve. "My dear Ravenscroft," she said, and her voice carried, pitched with beautiful precision to reach every ear in the room, "you are unwell. The heat. Do come and take some air." It was a leash. Cordelia saw it settle. She saw the Duke's shoulders drop a half-inch, saw the open hand close and fall to his side, saw the grey eyes shutter as though someone had drawn heavy curtains across a lit window. Whatever had cracked in him, the Dowager's 4 soft words sealed it over again with a mason's speed. He inclined his head to his grandmother. He did not look at Cordelia again. "The heat," he agreed, and his voice was once more the flat, correct, ducal voice that had refused her hand. "Quite so." The orchestra, released, plunged gratefully into a country dance. The floor filled. The moment closed over like water over a dropped stone, and within a minute one might have believed nothing at all had happened, except that every soul in the room had felt it happen, and would remember, and would talk. Cordelia walked to the terrace doors, and out into the summer night before her knees could reconsider the whole arrangement of holding her up. The garden air struck her like a mercy. After the beeswax and hot wax and crushed rose scent of 200 perfumed bodies, the night smelled of cut grass and river damp and, unmistakably, jasmine, the great pale banks of it that Lady Marchbanks trained along the balustrade, opening now in the dark and pouring their sweetness out into the heat. Cordelia set both her gloved hands on the cool stone of the rail, and breathed, and breathed, and let the trembling have her at last, out here where no one could bank it as evidence. Below her the lantern-lit garden fell away in terraces toward the black gleam of the Thames. A moth blundered against the nearest lamp, with a soft, persistent tapping. Somewhere further down a fountain talked to itself. And Cordelia Blythe, 25 years old, gently born and quietly ruined, stood in a borrowed amber gown that had been her mother's evening silk, cut down and dyed, and tried to understand what had just been done to her. For it made no sense. That was the thing that turned, and turned in her like a key that would not catch. A public cut. Yes, she had half expected some coldness. A duke did not marry a squire's portionless daughter, and she had never for one moment imagined he might. She had come tonight because her aunt had wept, and her aunt had begged, and her aunt had said that one dance, one single dance with a man of consequence, might yet turn the tide of the whispers that had followed the family out of Somerset. She had offered her hand for a country dance. Nothing more. A duke might have declined it with a bow and a murmured excuse, and no one would have marked it. He had not declined it with a bow. He had declined it as though the sight of her cost him something, and then he had said her name, her Christian name, which she was certain, entirely certain, she had never given him, in a voice that had come apart in the middle. "You have never met the man," she said aloud to the jasmine, because saying it aloud made it firmer. "You have never in your life been introduced to the Duke of Ravenscroft." "No," said a voice from the darkness at the end of the terrace. "You have not, and I have spent a great deal of effort ensuring it stayed that way." Cordelia's whole body went still. He stepped out of the shadow of the great stone urn where he had been standing, where he must have come the moment the dowager's back was turned, out through some other door, around some other way. And how long had he been there, listening to her talk to a flowering shrub? The lantern light found him in pieces. The strong line of a shoulder, the pale slash of his cravat, the grey eyes that had not, it seemed, shuttered nearly so completely as she had believed. Your Grace. She dropped a curtsy, shallow this time, and cold. You should not be here. You will be missed, and I will be blamed for it. And I have already been blamed for quite enough this evening for a thing I did not do. I know. He did not come closer. He kept the full width of the terrace between them. As a man keeps his distance from a fire he has already been burned by once. That is the difficulty, Miss Blythe. You keep being blamed for things you did not do. I find I can no longer stomach adding to the account. Then you might have begun, she said, by taking my hand when I offered it. The words came out sharper than she had meant them to. She heard her aunt's horrified voice in her head, one does not speak so to a duke, and found she did not much care. She had been made a spectacle of. A little plain speaking was the least of what she was owed. Something moved across his face. In the uncertain light it might have been shame. It might have been amusement. When he spoke his voice was quiet, and roughened at the edges, and it did strange things to the summer air between them. If I had taken your hand, he said, I should have had to let it go again at the end of the set. And I did not trust myself, Miss Blythe, to be able to do that in front of 500 people without disgracing us both. As it happens, his mouth twisted, I managed the disgrace regardless. So perhaps I ought to have danced with you after all, and spared us the curtsy. Though I will say the curtsy was the finest piece of insolence I have witnessed in a ballroom in my life, and I have witnessed a great deal. Cordelia stared at him. The jasmine poured its sweetness between them. Down in the dark the fountain went on murmuring, and the moth tapped and tapped at the lantern's hot glass. I do not understand a single word you have said to me, she told him, and I would be obliged if you would either explain yourself or let me pass. My aunt will be looking for me. Your aunt, said the Duke of Ravenscroft, is at this moment being told by 3 separate ladies of my grandmother's acquaintance that you contrived the whole scene to entrap me. By tomorrow, it will be in every drawing room from Grosvenor Square to the river. That is what my grandmother does. Miss Blythe. She does not raise her voice. She does not need to. She merely rises from her chair and says a kind word about the heat, and by breakfast the story has been written, and it is never, I promise you, never the true one. He took one step toward her then, only one, and stopped himself with visible effort, and Cordelia understood 2 things in the same instant. The first was that the crack she had seen open in him across that ballroom floor had not been a moment's weakness. It was the true face, and the ducal coldness was the mask, and the effort of holding the one over the other had been costing him for far longer than tonight. The second was that he had told her his grandmother would ruin her by morning, and he had said it not as a threat, but as a warning, which meant he was, in his own strange and ruinous fashion, on her side. And that was the most dangerous thing anyone had told her in 4 years, because it was the first thing in 4 years she had wanted to believe. Why, she said. Her voice was not quite steady. Whatever quarrel your family has, it is not with me. I am nobody, Your Grace. I am a squire's daughter with no fortune, and a name that has been dragged through Somerset mud. There is nothing in me worth the ruining. There, the Duke's laugh was short, and entirely without humour. You see, that is precisely the lie, and you have learned it so well you say it like a catechism. Someone has been at great pains to teach it to you. He looked at her for a long moment, and the grey eyes in the lantern light were no longer drowning. They were steady and terribly sad, and fixed on her as though he were memorizing a face he did not expect to be permitted to see again. You truly do not know, he said, more to himself than to her. She told me you did not, and I did not believe her. My God. You truly have no idea who you are." The words dropped into Cordelia like stones into the black river below. "That," she said, "is a cruel thing to say to a woman you have already humiliated once tonight." "Yes," he did not deny it. "It is. Forgive me." And then, before she could form the question that was rising in her, "Who you are? What do you mean, who am I?" The terrace door behind her opened on a wash of candlelight and orchestra, and a footman in the Marchbanks livery stepped through with a folded paper on a small silver salver. And the Duke of Ravenscroft stepped back into the shadow of the stone urn so smoothly that when the footman's eyes swept the terrace, they found only a young lady standing alone at the rail. "Miss Blythe?" said the footman. Yes, she was proud of how level it came. "A note, miss. I was asked to see it into your hand and no other." She took it. The paper was heavy, expensive, and sealed with a great blot of slate-grey wax, into which had been pressed a device she knew without being told. A raven, wings spread, above a crown. The seal of the House of Ravenscroft. But the Duke of Ravenscroft was standing not 8 feet from her, behind an urn, and had sent no footman, and was watching the salver now with an expression she could only call dread. The footman bowed and withdrew. The door closed. The music dimmed again to a murmur through glass. "Do not open it," the Duke said softly. Cordelia broke the seal. There were only 3 lines, in a hand so elegant it might have been engraved, and no signature, because a woman like the writer of it required no signature, and knew it. "Come to Ravenscroft House at 11 tomorrow morning," the note said. "Come alone, and tell no one, and we shall discuss what is to be done about you. You have, I think, no notion of how little choice you have in the matter." Cordelia read it twice. The July heat had not lessened, but she was cold now. Cold in the marrow. The way she had been cold the morning the men came to take away her mother's harp, and she had stood in the empty music room and watched her whole girlhood carried out the door in 2 pieces. She looked up. The Duke had come out of the shadow again, and he was reading her face the way she had just read the note, line by line, and finding no comfort in any of it. "She has summoned you," he said. It was not a question. 11 o'clock. Cordelia's fingers had closed hard around the paper, crumpling the elegant hand, the raven, the crown. "To discuss what is to be done about me, as though I were a debt, or a leaking roof." She lifted her chin. "I shall not go, of course. I am not one of her tenants. She has no claim on me whatsoever." "No." The Duke of Ravenscroft's voice was very quiet and very certain, and it closed around her like the terrace draught, like the dark, like the scent of jasmine that she knew, already, she would never again be able to smell without remembering this exact moment. "That is the second lie you have been taught, Miss Blythe. She has every claim on you, and by this hour tomorrow, whether you go to that house or not, you will no longer be able to pretend you are nobody at all." Behind them, the orchestra swept up into the opening bars of a waltz, and the lantern nearest the rail guttered and steadied. And Cordelia Blythe stood with the Duke's grandmother's summons crushed in her fist, and understood, with the cold clarity that had carried her through every ruin so far, that the door back into her small, safe, invisible life had just swung quietly shut, and that she had not heard the lock turn until now. The Duke did not stay to see whether she would answer him. A second footman had appeared at the terrace door, the dowager's man this time, in the raven livery, his eyes going straight to his master, with the flat patience of a hound that has been sent to fetch, and the Duke of Ravenscroft turned from her without another word, and went in through the light and the music, his broad back swallowed by the crush before Cordelia had drawn her next breath. So she was alone with the note, and the jasmine, and the seal she had, already broken. She smoothed the crumpled paper flat against the balustrade, as though flattening it might soften what it said, and found it would not. The raven kept its wings, the crown kept its points. Come alone, and tell no one. She folded it small and pushed it down inside her glove, against the pulse of her wrist, where the edge of the paper bit her skin all the way back through the ballroom, past the cardroom door where two gentlemen fell silent as she passed. Past the long mirror that showed her a young woman in amber silk, walking very straight and very slowly, as though balancing a full cup she must not spill. Her aunt was by the third window, exactly where a woman goes when she wishes to be found without appearing to wait. Mrs. Beatrice Annesley had been handsome once, and was handsome yet, in a soft, anxious way, with her late husband's pearls at her throat and her sister's chin, Cordelia's mother's chin, trembling now above them. There you are. Her aunt's gloved hand closed round Cordelia's arm hard enough to leave a mark, and her voice dropped to the pitch of a woman, speaking through a smile she does not feel. Do not stop. Do not look at anyone. We are leaving, and we are leaving as though we have somewhere finer to be. Aunt, Lady Sefton has already asked me whether it is true you were promised to a curate in Bath, and jilted him for a title. Beatrice steered her toward the great staircase, nodding to a passing dowager, with a brightness that would not have deceived a child. And Mrs. Fanshawe wished to know, so very kindly, whether your poor mother's illness had left you a little. She touched her temple, Cordelia, in front of me. She touched her own temple, as though the answer were written there. The heat of the ballroom fell behind them stair by stair. The hall below was cooler, marble and candle smoke, and a footman was already sent running for the Annesley carriage, which was hired and shabby, and would be brought round last of all the fine equipages waiting in the summer dark. They stood in an alcove to wait for it, and Cordelia's aunt at last let the smile fall from her face, and beneath it was something Cordelia had not seen there before. Not anger. Fear. What did you do, Beatrice whispered, to make the Duke of Ravenscroft say your name? Nothing. The word came out too fast. Aunt, I swear to you, nothing. I offered him a dance because you begged me to. He refused it. I curtsied, and I turned to go. I have never spoken a word to that man in my life. Then, why did he? I do not know. And that, at least, was wholly true, and the truth of it must have shown, because her aunt's grip loosened by a degree. I do not know why he said it. I do not know why he followed me to the terrace after. I do not. He followed you to the terrace. Beatrice closed her eyes. Oh, Cordelia. Nothing happened. He warned me of something, and then he was gone. She would not speak of the note. Tell no one, the paper said against her wrist. And though she despised the woman who had written it, some cold instinct told her the writer was right about one thing at least, that a secret shared with her frightened aunt would be all over Grosvenor Square by noon, wrapped in Beatrice's anxious explanations, and that whatever small ground Cordelia had left to stand on, she had better not surrender it to gossip before she understood the shape of the thing herself. He said his grandmother would put it about that I had contrived the whole scene to trap him, and by the look on your face, aunt, she has begun already. Beatrice's silence was answer enough. The carriage came. It was, indeed, brought round last, and the link boy who handed them up did it with a smirk that told Cordelia the servants' hall knew as much as the ballroom. She sat back against the worn squabs and watched the great lit house slide away behind them, all its windows gold. The music thinning to a thread, and then to nothing, as the horses turned toward the shabbier streets where an impoverished widow and her ruined niece could afford 3 rooms and a girl to do for them. We shall have to go home to Somerset, Beatrice said at last, into the dark of the rocking carriage. There is nothing else for it. After tonight, no house in London will receive you, and I have not the means to weather a season's worth of closed doors, a small, wet sound. I had such hopes. I truly thought, one dance, only one, with a man whom no scandal has ever touched, and the whole ugly business in Somerset might have been made to look like the invention it was. Instead, you are the woman a duke could not bear to touch. He bore it very ill, Cordelia said quietly, watching the gas lamps swim past the glass. That is rather the difficulty. What do you mean by that? I do not know what I mean. She pressed her wrist, and the paper crackled inside her glove, and she thought of grey eyes in lantern light saying, "You truly have no idea who you are," as though it broke his heart to know it. Only that a man does not refuse a hand as though it costs him blood, and then chase the woman into a garden to warn her against his own family, unless something is very wrong indeed. And I mean to find out what. Beatrice's head came up sharply. You will do no such thing. You will keep to your room and pack, and by Thursday we shall be on the mail to Taunton, and in a year no one will remember your name. But the carriage rocked on through the summer night, and Cordelia said nothing. And inside her glove the raven and the crown pressed their message steadily into her skin, and she knew, with the same cold certainty that had told her the lock had turned, that she was not going to be on the Thursday mail to Taunton. She was going to be at Ravenscroft House at 11 o'clock. She did not sleep. The little room under the eaves was hot, even with the casement thrown wide, and the noises of an unfamiliar street came up to her all night. A watchman calling the hour, a cart over the cobbles, once a burst of laughter from some doorway, 2 streets off. Toward dawn a milk cart clattered by, and the sparrows began in the plane tree outside her window, and she gave up the pretense and rose and washed in tepid water and dressed herself, because the girl who did for them did not come until 8, and she did not wish to be seen or questioned. She had one gown fit for a morning call that was not the amber silk, and it had been her own before the ruin, a gown of pale grey-green muslin, sprigged, a little out of the fashion but clean and well kept, the sort of thing a gentlewoman of no particular fortune might wear to church. She put it on. She dressed her dark hair simply, in the plain coil her mother had used to call her governess knot, and she looked at the young woman in the spotted glass and thought that at least she did not look like a schemer. She looked like exactly what she was, a squire's daughter with no money. Going to answer a summons she had not the standing to refuse. At 9:30, when her aunt was still abbot, she wrote a note of her own, "Gone to walk in the park and think. Do not fret, I shall be home by 2, and left it on the breakfast table under the sugar bowl, and went out into the bright hard July morning before her courage could examine itself too closely. She could not afford a hackney the whole way, so she walked until the streets grew wide and clean, and the houses grew tall and pale and set back behind their railings, and the smell of the poorer quarter, coal smoke, fish, the river at low tide, gave way by degrees to swept pavements and watered flower baskets, and the green breath of the park drifting over the rooftops. By the time she came to the square where Ravenscroft House stood, she had blistered her heel, and her half-boots were grey with dust, and she stopped across the road in the shade of a lime tree to catch her breath, and to look at the place where the note said it would be decided what was to be done about her. It was enormous, not merely large, enormous, a great block of honey-coloured stone, with a portico that could have sheltered a coach and 4, and tall windows curtained in some pale silk that stirred, and railings tipped with gilt, and over the door a stone raven with its wings spread wide, exactly as on the seal, exactly as on the note pressed all night against her wrist. 2 footmen stood at the door like painted soldiers. A gardener was watering the geraniums in the window boxes with a long brass can, and the water pattered down onto the hot flags with a sound like a small brief rain, and the smell of the wet stone and the crushed geranium leaves came to her across the road, green and bruised and sweet. For a moment, one honest moment, she thought of turning round. Then a clock somewhere behind those pale windows began to strike 11, unhurried, each stroke dropping into the morning like a coin onto a counter, and Cordelia Blythe lifted her dusty hem out of the gutter, crossed the road, and climbed the steps of the house that had been built, though she did not yet know it, on a secret with her name in it. "Miss Blythe," she told the nearer footman, before he could look down his nose at her boots. "I am expected." Something flickered behind his blankness. She was expected. Even the servants had been told, and he bowed her in without a word, and the great door closed behind her, and the noise of the street cut off as cleanly as if it had been sliced with a knife. Inside it was cool. That was the first thing. After the glare and heat of the walk, the marble hall struck up its February chill through the soles of her boots, and she understood that this was a house so vast and so old that summer never reached its heart. The second thing was the silence. No music here, no chatter, only the tick of the great clock still shivering out the last of 11 and, far off, the click of her own heels as a second servant led her across an acre of black and white marble, up a stair wide enough for 6 to climb abreast, and along a gallery hung with faces. She could not help but look at them. Ravenscrofts, all, generations of them. The men dark and grey-eyed and severe, the women pale and beautiful and cold, and every one of them with the same particular set to the jaw that she had seen last night, on a man who had lost his composure in a ballroom and paid for it before the whole ton. At the end of the gallery hung one portrait new enough that the paint still had its gloss. The Duke himself, younger, unguarded, in hunting green, one hand on the neck of a grey horse, and something in his face that the later years had plainly taught him to hide. She slowed before it despite herself. "He was 21 when that was taken," said a voice, "before he learned what the name costs." The Dowager Duchess of Ravenscroft sat in the room at the gallery's end, a small, exquisite morning room all in pale blue and gilt, with the tall windows giving onto the garden and a fire lit, in July, in the marble grate, because the old are always cold, and the powerful are never made to suffer for their comfort. She had not risen. She sat very upright in a chair like a small throne, in dove-grey silk this morning, the pearls exchanged for a single grey stone on her breast the size of a robin's egg, and her white hair dressed high, and her face, Cordelia had thought it beautiful across a ballroom, and it was more so here, close, in the merciless morning light. Beautiful the way a blade is beautiful, all clean lines and cold purpose, and not one soft thing anywhere in it. "You came," the Dowager said. "On foot, by the state of your hem. I confess I did not think you would come at all. It shows a certain resolution. Sit." "I prefer to stand, Your Grace." Cordelia's heart was going hard, but she had curtsied to 200 people last night and held it a beat too long on purpose, and she found her voice was steady. "I do not expect to stay." "No?" The old woman's mouth curved, not quite a smile. "How little you know of your own affairs. Sit down, Miss Blythe. I did not summon you here to quarrel with you in a doorway like a tradesman come about a bill. Sit and take some tea, and let us understand one another, because the understanding we reach in this room will govern the whole of your future, and I should hate for you to squander it on the pleasure of a girlish defiance you cannot afford." A footman had appeared with a tray, thin porcelain, a silver pot, a plate of something small and glazed, and set it down, and withdrawn, and shut the door, and the shutting of it was very quiet and very final. Cordelia looked at the closed door, and at the cold, beautiful woman, and at the fire burning wastefully in the summer grate, and she sat, because to keep standing now would have been the flinch she had promised herself she would never show. She sat, and she folded her dusty gloves in her lap, and she waited. The Dowager poured the tea herself. It was, Cordelia understood, a calculated insult, and a calculated courtesy both at once. A duchess pouring for a squire's daughter. An act that said, "I lower myself to you, and see how far I have had to stoop in the very same motion." She passed the cup. Cordelia took it, and did not drink. "You are wondering," said the Dowager, "why my grandson said your name. I am wondering a great many things, Your Grace. Then I shall spare you the labor of the least important of them." The old woman settled back, her grey stone catching the firelight. "He said it because he has, against every instruction I have given him for 4 years, made himself familiar with your circumstances. He knows your name, because I told it to him, once, in a moment I have since had cause to regret. And he lost his countenance in Lady Marchbanks's ballroom, because my grandson, Miss Blythe, for all his cold correctness, is his father's son, and his father was a man who could be governed by everything except his own heart. It appears the failing is hereditary. I had hoped otherwise. Cordelia set the cup down in its saucer with great care, because her hand had begun to shake, and she would not have this woman see the china rattle. "You speak," she said, "as though the Duke and I had some acquaintance. We have none. Until last night, I had never so much as seen his face except in a print shop window. I know precisely how little acquaintance you have." The dowager's eyes rested on her, pale and unblinking. "I have taken very great care over it. Do you imagine it was chance, Miss Blythe, that you were not presented in your first season? That the invitations your aunt hoped for never came? That the small inheritance your mother believed she had secured for you dissolved into lawyers' letters and came to nothing? And that the scandal in Somerset, the tale that you were fast, that you were unstable, that there was madness in your mother's line, sprang up so conveniently, so completely, out of a single unpaid gaming debt of your late father's, that no one has ever quite been able to trace it to its source?" The room had gone very quiet. The fire ticked. Down in the garden a bird sang 3 notes and stopped. "You," Cordelia said. Her voice did not sound like her own. "That was you. I am telling you, it was I." The dowager agreed. "Which you will observe is a very different thing from your being able to prove it. I tell you because I wish you to understand, before we go any further, exactly what I am, and exactly what I can do, and exactly how small your life has been for 4 years, without your ever once suspecting the hand that made it so. I did not do it for spite, Miss Blythe. I want you to understand that too. I have nothing against you personally. I did it because you are dangerous, and because you did not know you were dangerous. And an unloaded weapon is a far safer thing than a loaded one, provided it never learns that it is loaded." Cordelia's mouth was dry. "I do not understand you." "No." The old woman looked at her almost with something that was not quite pity. "Your mother swore to me she would never tell you. It seems, for once in her disobedient life, she kept her word. That is a mercy, for you, and very nearly for me." She rose then, at last, and crossed to the tall window, and stood looking down into the green summer garden, with her hands folded, a straight grey figure against the light. "Tell me, Miss Blythe, what do you know of your mother's family? Her people, before she married your father and buried herself in Somerset?" "Very little." Cordelia's thoughts were spinning. She never spoke of them. I understood there had been a breach, that she married beneath her hopes, and was cut off, and never looked back. She had one thing only from that life, a small harp, and when the men came to take it for my father's debts, she watched them carry it out, and she never afterward played a note on anything, not so much as a spinet, until the last of her illness took her. She lifted her chin. "What is that to you, or to the house of Ravenscroft?" The dowager was silent for a long moment, looking down at her roses. "Your mother," she said at last, without turning, "was not cut off for marrying beneath her, Miss Blythe. That is the story she was permitted to tell, and it was a kindness, and it cost me a great deal to arrange it. Your mother was sent away, and paid to stay away, and married to an obliging Somerset squire, with debts enough to make him grateful and pride enough to make him silent, because of what she was carrying when she left this house." She turned round. Her face against the bright window was all shadow, but her voice came very clear and very cold across the pale blue room. "Because of who her child would be." Cordelia sat perfectly still. The paper was gone from her wrist now, left in her glove at home, but she could feel it still. The raven, the crown, the elegant hand, come, and we shall discuss what is to be done about you. And she understood at last that the thing to be done about her had been begun a 1/4 of a century ago, before she was born, in this very house, and that she was the only person in it who had never been told. "Her child," Cordelia said. The words came out barely above a whisper. "You mean me?" I mean you. And what am I then? She was on her feet without deciding to stand. The cup went over, and the tea ran dark across the pale carpet, and neither of them looked at it. You have brought me across London to tell me I have been made a nobody on purpose, and that my mother was paid to hide me in Somerset, and that I am dangerous. Say it plainly, Your Grace. For I have had 4 years of being told lies I could recite like a catechism, and I will not sit through another. Who am I? Who was my mother, that the whole weight of a dukedom should have been spent for 25 years on keeping one squire's daughter poor and small and silent? For the first time since Cordelia had entered the room, the Dowager Duchess of Ravenscroft hesitated. It was the smallest thing, a stillness, a flicker, the marble face holding its composure by an effort that showed, for half a breath, at the corners of the eyes. And into that half-breath of hesitation, before the old woman could shape whatever careful, ruinous answer she had prepared, the morning-room door opened without a knock, and a voice that Cordelia already knew far too well said, low and hard, "That is enough. Grandmother, she has heard enough for one morning. And you have said a great deal more than you meant to." The Duke of Ravenscroft stood in the doorway in his riding coat, dust on his boots and the wildness not yet gone out of his eyes. And behind him in the gallery, half a pace back and beautiful as a painting in palest primrose muslin, stood a young lady Cordelia had never seen, fair and serene, and watching Cordelia across the ruined tea and the spreading stain with an expression of faint, sweet, wholly false concern. "Ravenscroft," said the Dowager, and her composure had shut again like a fan. "You were not expected until noon, and you have brought Lady Sophia to witness a scene not fit for her eyes. How very like your father." But the Duke was not looking at his grandmother, and he was not looking at the lovely stranger in primrose. He was looking at Cordelia across the small blue room, as though the two of them were the only people in the house, and Cordelia, with her mother's name suddenly a stranger's name, and the floor gone soft beneath her, looked back at him, and thought, quite clearly, through all the roaring in her ears, he already knows. Whatever I am, this man has known it all along. And he let me stand in that ballroom and offer him my hand not knowing it, and then he could not bear to take it. "Your Grace," she said to him, and her voice cracked straight down the middle. "What am I?" He opened his mouth to answer her, and Lady Sophia, stepping delicately over the threshold, laid one white hand upon the Duke's dusty sleeve, exactly, precisely, as the Dowager had laid her hand upon it in the ballroom the night before, and said, in a voice like sugared water, "Julian, dearest, you promised your grandmother you would say nothing. You did promise." The Duke went still under that small white hand, and Cordelia, watching the name Julian fall so easily from the stranger's lips, the Christian name, the intimate name, the name of a man who was promised, plainly, wholly, to this serene fair girl, who called it as though she owned it, felt the last of the ballroom's warmth go out of her, and knew that whatever secret this house had kept about her birth, it had kept another alongside it, that the man who could not bear to hold her hand already belonged to somebody else. The Duke did not shake the hand away. He looked down at it, the small white fingers, the marriage of them to his dusty sleeve, and something in his jaw worked once, and then he lifted his own hand and, with a gentleness that was worse than any violence, set Lady Sophia's aside. "I made that promise," he said, "to a woman who told me the truth was a kindness withheld. I have watched, these 4 years, what the kindness has cost. I find I have no further use for it." His grey eyes came back to Cordelia and stayed there. "Miss Blythe asked me a question." "Julian." Sophia's voice did not rise. It sweetened, and Cordelia was learning already to hear that sweetening as the family's particular way of drawing a rope tight. "Your grandmother is unwell. This is not the hour." "My grandmother," said the Dowager Duchess, "is in the room, and will thank you both to remember it." She had not moved from the window. The morning light lay hard along one side of her face and left the other in shadow, so that she seemed two women at once. The marble one Cordelia had faced across the tea, and some older, colder thing behind it. "Ravenscroft, come away from the door. You are making a spectacle, and there is a servant on the stair." The Duke shut the door himself. The click of the latch went through the small room like the closing of a book. "There," he said. "No servant now, no one to carry it down to the kitchens. Only the four of us and the thing you have spent a quarter of a century burying." He crossed to the ruined tea tray and stood over the spreading stain, and for a moment he seemed to gather himself, as a man does at the top of a height he means to jump from. "Cordelia, your name is not Blythe. Blythe was the name of the man who married your mother for her portion, and his silence. A decent enough man, by all I have heard, and gentle to you, but not your father. Your father was my uncle, Lord Edmund Ravenscroft, my grandmother's eldest son, the man who was to have stood where I stand and worn what I wear, and who would have had a fever not taken him in a rented room in Lisbon before you drew your first breath." The fire ticked. Down in the garden the same bird sang its 3 notes and stopped, as if it too were listening. "You are lying," Cordelia said. It was not what she meant. What she meant was, "Please be lying. You are lying to wound your grandmother, and you are using me to do it." "He is not lying," said the Dowager, quite calmly. "That is the difficulty with my grandson. He has never learnt to lie. His uncle had the same defect, and it undid him." She turned from the window at last. "Sit down, Miss Blythe, before you fall. You have gone the colour of the wall." Cordelia did not sit. Her legs were water, and her ears were full of the sea, but she locked her knees and set one dusty half-boot a little forward on the pale carpet, and stood, because standing was the only thing left in her that would still obey. "My father," she said, "was a Somerset squire named Thomas Blythe. He taught me to sit a horse, and he wept at my mother's grave, and he lost our house at cards, and I loved him. You will not take him from me in a morning room to serve your own arrangements." "No one is taking him from you," the Duke said. "Lo, he raised you. That is a father, whatever the register says. But the register says another thing, and the register is what has ruled your life without your ever being shown it." He turned to the old woman. "Tell her the rest, grandmother. You have told her the worst of it, that you made her small on purpose. Tell her why. Or by God I will." The Dowager Duchess of Ravenscroft crossed the room and sat once more in her small gilt throne, and arranged her dove grey skirts, and folded her hands over the great grey stone that rose and fell now a little faster than it had. When she spoke, her voice had lost none of its precision, but something had come into it that had not been there over the tea. A weariness, ancient and stony. The weariness of a general who has held a bridge so long she has forgotten what lies on the other side of it. "My eldest son married your mother in secret in the spring of the year he came of age," she said. "She was a music master's daughter, clever and lovely, and entirely without consequence, which is the one thing this family cannot marry and survive. Edmund knew it. He married her regardless, in a village church in Kent, before 2 witnesses and a curate who was paid handsomely to forget his own hand in the book. Then he went abroad on his tour, as young men did, meaning to come home and present her to me when he had the courage, and instead he sent a letter to say a fever had him, and then he sent no more letters at all." Her jaw tightened, once, and eased. "Your mother came to this house 4 months gone with child, with a marriage line and a wedding ring, and a claim that would have made her the mother of the next duke, if the child were a son, and would, either way, have hung the name of Ravenscroft about, with the whole grubby tale of a runaway match, and a hedge wedding, and a music master's grandchild in the nursery." "So you paid her to go away," Cordelia said. Her lips were numb. "You paid my mother to vanish, and you married her to a stranger, and you let her raise me as a nobody. I gave her a choice, which was more than she gave me. The dowager's eyes were flat as slate. She might stay, and be the widowed marchioness who would never be received, whose child would grow up watched and whispered over, and hated by every soul in this house that had hoped for the succession. Or she might take a comfortable settlement, and a respectable husband, and a quiet life in a green county, where no one had ever heard the name, and raise her daughter free of all of it. She chose the green county. She swore she would never tell you. And I, Miss Blythe, kept the bargain on my side as faithfully as she kept it on hers. When your foolish father lost the settlement at cards, I could not prevent that. Even I cannot make a weak man strong. I saw to it the ruin was tidy. That the scandal in Somerset stayed a Somerset scandal. That you married no one, and rose to nothing, and drew no eye, because a granddaughter who is forgotten is a granddaughter who is safe, and a granddaughter who is safe cannot cost this family what her mother nearly cost it. Safe, Cordelia laughed, and the sound of it frightened her. It was so thin. You slandered me across 2 counties. You made the whole of Somerset believe there was madness in my mother's blood. You called that keeping me safe. I called it keeping you unloaded, the dowager said. There is a proof of that marriage, Miss Blythe. A page torn from a parish register, and a letter in Edmund's own hand naming you before you were born. Your mother would not give them up. Not for the settlement. Not for anything. She said they were the last of him. She hid them, and she took the hiding place with her when she went. And in 25 years I have not found it, though I have looked in ways you would not credit. The grey stone caught the fire. Until it is found and burned, you are a weapon that has never learned it was loaded. This morning my grandson has taught you. I could cheerfully throttle him for it. Cordelia looked at the Duke. He was standing very still by the cold hearth of the ruined tea, and he met her eyes, and he did not look away, and that steadiness, which she had thought last night on the terrace was the truest thing about him, was suddenly the cruelest, because it meant he had known. All of it. The register, the letter, the marriage, the name. He had carried it while she offered him her hand in a candlelit ballroom, not knowing whose hand she offered. You knew, she said. On the terrace. When you said I had no idea who I was. You knew exactly who I was. You have known for how long? 4 years. His voice had gone rough again, torn at the edge the way it had been when he said her name across the floor. My grandmother told me the day I came into the title. She thought it a thing a duke must know, where the family's danger lay, and how she had contained it. She showed me a miniature. Your mother's face painted the spring she married Edmund. His mouth twisted, not into a smile. You have it. The exact turn of it. I have spent 4 years knowing there was a woman in Somerset who was my blood and my equal, and had been made a beggar by my own house, and I told myself, as she told me, that the kindest thing I could do was leave you in your quiet, and never let you feel the size of what had been taken. I believed it. I believed it until I saw you sink into that curtsy last night, with the whole room baying at you. And I understood that I had not been protecting you at all. I had only been protecting this. He gestured at the room, the gilt, the silk, the raven over the door, the name, the comfort, the lie I get to go on living inside. Julian. Sophia had come forward, soft-footed, and she laid her white hand not on his sleeve this time, but on his arm, low, intimate, a claim made in front of a witness. You are overwrought. You have not slept. Come away, and we will send Miss Blythe home with something for her trouble, and in a week none of this. Do not, the Duke said, without looking at her, touch me just now. The fair girl's hand stopped in the air. Something crossed her serene face. Not hurt, calculation. Quick and cold. The recalculating of a woman who has felt a rope go slack and is measuring how fast to draw it in. She stepped back and folded her hands, and became, once more, a painting in primrose muslin. But Cordelia had seen it, and she had heard, too, the thing under the Duke's refusal, the reflex of it, the way a man pulls his hand from a stove, and a new cold understanding slid into her, layered over the first. "You are promised to her," she said. "Yes," said the Dowager, before her grandson could speak. "He is. And you will observe, Miss Blythe, that he did not deny it. Lady Sophia is the daughter of the Earl of Carroway, whose fortune this family requires, and whose alliance it has spent 2 years securing. The banns are to be read in September. It is the single most advantageous match of the decade, and it is the one thing standing between the House of Ravenscroft and a very great deal of unpleasantness, and my grandson knows it, which is why, for all his fine speeches, he is going to make it." She said it pleasantly, as one remarks upon the weather. "Now, we come to you." The old woman rose again and went to a small marquetry writing desk by the window and drew from it a folded paper, heavy, sealed, and she held it out across the pale carpet, not to Cordelia, but to the air between them, so that to take it Cordelia would have to cross and reach, and to leave it would be to refuse in front of them all. "Here is what is to be done about you," the Dowager said. "This is a deed of settlement. £4,000, placed in the funds, the interest yours for your life, the capital to your children after you. There is a passage to Lisbon booked in a fortnight's time. I thought it fitting. It is where your father lies, and you may visit the stone if you have a taste for such things. There is a cottage engaged near the English chaplaincy, and a companion, and a small society of the respectable sort who will never once ask you an inconvenient question, because none of them will ever know there was one to ask." She let the paper hang. "In exchange you will sign, before a solicitor, an acknowledgement that you make no claim of any kind upon this family, its name, its title, or its property, now or ever. You will leave England. And you will be, for the first time in your life, wholly and comfortably free. Free of us, free of the scandal, free of the small, mean poverty my son's weakness handed you. It is a better offer than your mother received. It is a better offer than you will ever receive again. Take it." Cordelia looked at the paper. The seal was slate-grey wax, the raven, the crown. £4,000. She thought, wildly, of her aunt weeping in the hired carriage, of the 3 hot rooms under the eaves, of the girl who did for them and did not come until 8, of her mother watching the harp go out the door in 2 pieces and never touching a string again. £4,000 would buy back every single thing that had ever been taken from her, and a warm, dry country besides, and the end of every whisper. And all it asked in return was that she agree, in her own hand, that she was nobody after all. "You have thought of everything," she said. "I have had 25 years. The Dowager's hand did not waver. "Take the paper, child." Cordelia crossed the carpet. She felt them all watching, the old woman's flat pale eyes, Sophia's mild blue ones, the Duke's grey ones burning, and she reached out and took the folded deed from the Dowager's gloved fingers, and she felt the weight of it, the good thick paper, the coin's solid promise of it. She turned it over once. She looked at the raven pressed into the wax, the same bird spread over the door, the same bird that had bitten its message into her wrist all night. And then she looked at the Duke. "When you refused my hand," she said to him, "you told me on the terrace it was because you did not trust yourself to let it go again in front of 500 people. Was that true, or was it only the kindest of the lies?" His face went bare. It was true. "Then I am sorry for you," Cordelia said, "because you are going to have to let go of a great deal, more than a hand. And there will be no garden to say it in afterward." She turned back to the Dowager, and she held the deed out, level, steady, and let it drop. It fell to the pale carpet beside the spilled tea, and lay there, £4,000 face down in the wreck of the morning. I will not go to Lisbon, she said. I will not sign my mother's silence over my own name. You have told me, Your Grace, in this room, of your own free choosing, that I am the legitimate daughter of Lord Edmund Ravenscroft. You said it to frighten me. And instead, you have handed me the one thing my mother spent her life protecting, and you spent yours hunting. I know who I am now. You cannot untell it. And I find, having been nobody for 25 years, that I have very little to lose by discovering what it costs to be somebody. The silence that followed had a texture. Cordelia knew that texture. She had felt it on her bare arms in a ballroom the night before. This time, she did not wait inside it. She dropped the old woman a curtsy deep, flawless, water finding its level, held a beat past what was owed, the exact curtsy she had given a duke's departing back, and she saw the dowager's marble face understand it, and hate it. She was halfway down the great stair, one gloved hand skimming the cold marble rail, her heart going like a hare's, when she heard the boots behind her, hard, even, and then the 7th step landing wrong, hesitating, the sound she would have known now in a crowd of 1,000. Cordelia, the Duke, came down 2 steps at a stride and caught the rail beside her, not her arm. He had learned, it seemed, not to reach for her hand. Stop, please. 1 minute. She will have me watched by the hour after this. 1 minute is all I shall have. She stopped on the landing, under a tall window where the July light fell in a hard gold slab across the black and white stone, and she turned to face him. Up close, the wildness she had seen in his eyes at the ballroom had not gone. It had only been driven inward, banked, and it looked out at her now from behind the correct grey stillness, like a fire behind a grate. You are betrothed, she said. You are to marry Lady Sophia in September for her father's fortune, and you knew who I was for 4 years, and said nothing. And you let your grandmother beggar me and slander me, and you did nothing. And now you run down a staircase to say, what? What is there left for you to say to me, Your Grace? That the proof still exists. He said it fast, quiet, glancing once up the stair. She told you she never found it. That is true. Your mother hid the register page and Edmund's letter, and she hid them well, and my grandmother has torn apart every lodging your mother ever kept and never come near them. Cordelia, think. What did your mother keep to the end? What went with her from house to house, that she would not part with, that she watched carried away and never played again? The gold light seemed to tilt. The harp, Cordelia whispered. The harp. His grey eyes held hers. It is the only thing that makes sense of her. She stopped playing the day it went for your father's debts, not because she loved the music, but because she loved what was inside it, and she could not bear to have lost the keeping of it. The proof of who you are, Cordelia, is sewn into the body of your mother's harp, and your mother's harp was sold. And I do not know to whom. But my grandmother does not know to whom either. And she has more men and more money than you. And though the ship's sailing gives you a fortnight, she has already set her own men to trace those goods, and if she finds it before you do, she will put it in that summer fire. He did not look toward the morning room, but they both heard, in memory, the wasteful crackle of it, and you will be nobody again, this time forever, and there will be no untelling that. Cordelia stared at him. Somewhere above them a door opened and closed. A light foot crossed a floor. Why are you telling me this? She said. You marry Sophia to keep this family whole. If I find that harp, I break it. I am the ruin you are selling yourself to prevent. Why hand me the weapon, Julian? For a moment he said nothing at all. The gold light lay between them on the cold stone. Down in the marble hall a clock counted, unhurried, and outside a gardener's brass can pattered water on hot flags. That small brief rain, green and bruised and sweet through the open window. Because I have spent 4 years being the kind of man my grandmother made, he said at last, very low. And last night a woman sank into a curtsy in front of the whole ton and taught me, in one motion, what it looks like to answer cruelty with grace instead of with silence. I have been silent my whole life, Cordelia. It is the family gift. I am tired to the marrow of it. His hand came up, halfway, the fingers open, the same helpless gesture she had watched across the ballroom floor, and this time he did not let his grandmother's word close it for him. He set it, lightly, deliberately, against the cold marble rail a hand's breadth from her own, not touching, choosing not to, and letting her see the choice. Find the harp. Before the fortnight is out, I cannot help you openly. She will have my every hour, and Caraway's men besides. But I can tell you this, the last dealer to handle your mother's things was a broker named Petch in a court off the Strand, and he keeps his ledgers, and he is greedy, and he will talk to anyone who comes before my grandmother's men reach him first. Go tonight. Go before you sleep. Julian, Miss Blythe. Lady Sophia's voice came down the stair like sugared water poured over stone. She stood at the top of the flight, primrose and serene, one white hand resting on the newel post, and her mild blue eyes moved from the Duke's hand near Cordelia's on the rail to Cordelia's face and back again, and filed it, and smiled. You have dropped a very valuable paper in Her Grace's morning room. She has asked me to say that the offer stands until the ship sails, and not 1 hour beyond, and that she does hope you will be sensible. It would be such a pity, the smile did not move, if your poor aunt were troubled again. Mrs. Annesley, is it not? In those small rooms off the river. The neighborhood is so very quick to talk, and a widow has so little to shield her. The threat landed exactly where it was aimed. Cordelia felt it go in, her aunt, weeping, packing, steered through a ballroom by a smile she did not feel, and she felt the Duke go rigid at her side, and she understood that the leash the Dowager had laid on him last night had just been passed, quite openly, into this fair girl's white hands. Cordelia lifted her chin. Tell Her Grace, she said, that I heard her offer, and that I have already answered it, and that she may read my answer in the state of her carpet. She gathered her dusty grey-green skirt in one hand. Good morning, Lady Sophia. I hope you will be very happy in September. She went down the last of the stair without hurrying, across the acre of cold marble, past the 2 footmen standing like painted soldiers. Out through the great door the servant opened for her, and the noise of the summer street came up to meet her all at once. The carts and the criers, and the green breath of the park, warm and loud and alive after the February chill of that terrible house. She stood a moment on the honey-coloured steps under the spread stone wings of the Raven, and she found her hands were shaking, and she found she did not care, because for the first time in 4 years the shaking was not fear. Somewhere off the Strand, in a broker's court, a man named Petch kept his ledgers. Somewhere in London, unless the summer fire had it first, her mother's harp stood in a stranger's parlour, with Cordelia's true name folded silent in its heart. She had until a ship sailed. She had an aunt to shield, and a duke she must not love, and a grandmother who had spent a dukedom to keep her small. And she had, at last, the one thing that woman had taken most care she should never be given. She had the truth, and she was going to go and find where it was hidden, before anyone in that pale, cold, beautiful house could reach it to burn it. Cordelia Blythe, Cordelia Ravenscroft, lifted her dusty hem out of the gutter for the second time that day, and turned toward the river, and began to walk very fast into the bright, hard heat of the afternoon. The court off the Strand was no wider than a coffin set on end, and it smelled of it, river rot and cat, and the cold soot of a chimney that had not drawn properly since the Regent was a boy. Cordelia came into it out of the afternoon glare, and stood blinking, while her eyes made sense of the shadow, and a bell over a low door gave a cracked, apologetic clank as she pushed it inward. "We're shut," said a voice from the gloom. "Come Thursday." "You are not shut," Cordelia said, "for there is a candle lit, and a man behind it, and I have walked from Grosvenor Square in the heat, and I will not walk it twice." A face lifted over the counter, narrow, whiskered, with small, quick eyes that took in her dusty half-boots. her out-of-fashion muslin, the flush of the long walk on her cheeks, and priced every inch of her before she had finished the sentence. Mr. Petch was a small, round man in a coat gone green at the seams, and he was beautiful in none of his parts, and yet there was something almost merry in the greed of him, the way a magpie is merry over a dropped ring. "A gentlewoman come down in the world," he said, not unkindly. "We get a deal of those. What are we selling, my dear? The mother's lace? A locket? I give fair prices. Ask anyone in the court. I am not selling. I am buying back." Cordelia set both gloved hands flat on the counter, so he should not see them shake. "4 years ago you handled the goods of a household broken up in Somerset. A squire named Blythe sold up for debt. There was a harp among the things, a small gilt harp, single action, the soundboard painted with a wreath of green leaves. I want the name of who bought it." Petch's small eyes went still. Just for a moment, a magpie hearing a hawk. Then he spread his stained hands. 4 years. My dear, I could not tell you what came through this door on Tuesday. You keep ledgers. She had it from the Duke, and she said it as though she had it from God. Every dealer keeps ledgers, and you keep yours better than most, for you are greedier than most, and greed is only memory that has learned its own worth. I will pay you for the looking. That turned the key. She saw it turn. He wet his lips. What's it worth to you? He said softly. This harp with the green leaves. It was worth, in the end, the whole of the coin she had, 11 shillings and a 3-penny bit, everything her aunt did not know she carried, tipped out onto the greasy counter, while Petch counted it with one finger and looked sorrowful over the smallness of the heap. But greed that has been shown a larger greed behind it will take the small bird in the hand, and Cordelia had let him understand, without once saying so, that a duke's grandmother wanted this thing too, and that a man who could say he had sold it before her Grace's people arrived might name his own price to her Grace's people afterward. There was another asking, Petch said, running a black nail down a page gone furry with damp. Only this morning. A hard sort of man, quiet livery, would not give a name. He did not look up, but his voice had sharpened with the pleasure of being courted from 2 directions at once. Told him Thursday, same as you. Here we are then, Blythe, Somerset, the mixed lot, bed linen, a fender, books by the yard, 1 harp, single action, gilt. His nail stopped. Sold on to a Mr. Ray, music seller. Great Marlborough Street, the shop with the blue door. Bought it for the gilt and never sold it on, last I heard. Too dear for the trade that comes to him. Too plain for the quality. He looked up at last, whiskers twitching. You'd best be quick, my dear. The quiet man in the quiet livery did not look to me like one who waits for Thursday. Cordelia was already at the door. If he comes back, she said, you never saw me. For 11 shillings, said Petch, sweeping the coins into his palm with the tenderness of a communicant, I never see anybody. It is the great advantage of my situation. The cracked bell clanked her out into the light. Great Marlborough Street was half the city away, and the afternoon was burning down toward evening by the time she reached it. Her blistered heel raw now, her breath short. The blue door stood open to catch what air the day would give, and above it a bow window held a clutter of second-hand music, a battered serpent, a stack of song sheets curling in the heat, a violin with 2 strings. And behind the glass, tilted in a corner where the low sun could not reach the gilt, stood a small single-action harp with a wreath of green leaves painted round its soundboard, and Cordelia stopped dead on the pavement with her hand at her throat, because she had last seen it carried out of a music room in 2 men's arms, while her mother stood white and silent, and did not weep. The shop bell was gentler than Petch's. A stooped old man in spectacles looked up from a workbench where he was rehairing a bow, and behind him a boy of 10 or so sat cross-legged on the floor, mending a cracked flute case with glue and string, whistling through his teeth, entirely content. A child at his work in a warm shop full of the smell of resin and beeswax and old wood. And Cordelia's heart went out to him even in her hurry, for he was the first easy thing she had seen all day. The harp, she said. in the window. The gilt one, with the leaves. How much? Ah, mister. Ray set down the bow. The pretty one. Now there's a thing. He came round the bench wiping his hands. You've an eye, miss. French action, that, or copied from the French. And the painting's a lady's own work, I shouldn't wonder. You don't get leaves like that from a trade shop. 6 guineas and she's yours, and I'll not come down, for she's stood me 4 years, and I've grown fond. He caught the look on her face, and his own softened. You've not got 6 guineas. I have, Cordelia said, 11 shillings less than nothing, for I have just given the last of it to a man named Petch. But I will have 6 guineas, and more, within the fortnight, and I will sign you a paper for it, and I will tell you why. She put her hand flat on the harp's cool gilt frame, the way you touch a horse you mean to gentle. This was my mother's. She played it in a green county before I was born, and she never played anything again after it was taken from her. And there is something of hers hidden in it that is worth more to me than my life, and nothing at all to anyone else. And there is a man in a quiet livery walking toward your blue door at this moment to buy it and take it away and put it in a fire. I am asking you to trust a dusty stranger for the length of one evening. I know how it sounds. The old man looked at her a long moment over his spectacles. The boy had stopped whistling. It sounds, said Mr. Ray slowly, like the truth, which is a thing I don't hear above twice a year in this trade. He glanced at the window, at the street beyond it, going gold and long-shadowed. My father used to say a harp holds whatever you put into it, and gives it back when you least expect. Sentimental old fool he was. He wiped his hands again, though they were dry. What is it you think is in her? Papers, Cordelia said. Sewn into the body, behind the soundboard, where a woman might hide a thing and cover the seam with the lining. She had 4 months, and a needle, and a secret. It is exactly what she would do. Ray and the boy looked at each other. Then the old man reached down a candle, and lit it against the failing light, and carried it to the workbench. Bring her here, he said. Gently, mind, and you, Sam, bolt the blue door. They laid the harp on its side on a folded blanket, and Mr. Ray ran his knotted fingers along the seam where the soundboard met the body. Tap, 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 his head cocked like a man listening for water underground. Cordelia stood with her fists knotted in her skirt and did not breathe. The boy Sam held the candle steady in both hands, his tongue between his teeth with the importance of it. Hollow, Ray murmured. She's hollow where she oughtn't be. Feel here, miss, along the shoulder. There's a packing behind the lining that a French maker never put there. He took up a thin blade, warmed it in the candle flame, and slid it under the old glued lining, with a patience that made Cordelia want to scream. The resin smell sharpened. Somewhere out in the street a costermonger cried strawberries, ripe strawberries, and the sound came very far away, as though from another world where women had ordinary afternoons. The lining peeled back with a small, dry, tearing sound. And there, folded flat and stitched into a pouch of oiled silk, gone amber with age, packed close against the singing wood where 25 years of no music had kept it safe, lay a thin sheaf of papers. Cordelia's knees gave. She caught the edge of the bench. Ray drew the pouch out with 2 fingers as tenderly as he would lift a moth, and cut the rotted stitches, and shook the papers into the candlelight, and there they were. A single leaf, torn cleanly along one edge from a parish register, the ruled columns, the copperplate hand, the marriage solemnized in the parish of Wexham, in the county of Kent, between Edmund George Ravenscroft, bachelor, and Mary Ann Selwood, spinster, by license, before witnesses, and 2 names scrawled below, and the curate's, and the date in the spring of a year long, gone, and beneath it, in a bolder, warmer, more careless hand, a letter. My dearest Mary, if this comes to you, and I do not let them make you small. The child is mine, and I own it before God, and will own it before my mother when I am home. Whatever it costs the name, a girl, you say you feel it is a girl, then she is a Ravenscroft as much as ever I was, and no summer fire nor cold old woman shall unmake her. Keep this safe. Keep her safe. I am mending. I shall be home before the leaves turn. Your own Edmund. Cordelia read it once, and could not see it for the wet in her eyes, and wiped them roughly on her wrist and read it again. Before the leaves turn. He had never come home before the leaves turned, but he had written it, and her mother had sewn it into the singing heart of the one thing she would not sell her soul to keep. And here it was in a music seller's candlelight, 25 years late, saying the thing the whole house of Ravenscroft had spent a fortune to bury. That she was owned. That she was named. That she was real. Well, said Mr. Ray, very quietly, and took off his spectacles and polished them on his apron for no reason at all. Well now, there's your 6 guineas worth, and more, and you'll not owe me a farthing, miss, and I'll thank you not to argue. He folded the papers back into the oiled silk, with hands that were not quite steady. Sam, unbolt the door and mind the street. If there's a quiet man in a quiet livery, you send him off with a flea in his ear, for the harp's not for sale, it's gone back to its own. She would not sleep with the papers in the house off the river, where a smile in primrose muslin knew the address. She would not risk them on her person a moment longer than she must, and so, as the long summer dusk came down blue over the rooftops, and the lamplighter went his rounds with his little ladder and his flame, Cordelia Blythe did the only bold thing left to her. She went back to the one place her enemies would never think to look for what they hunted, because they believed it already theirs. She went to Ravenscroft House, not to the great door with its painted footman. She went round, in the gathering dark, to the mews and the garden gate, where a duke who could not help her openly had told her, in the space between 2 sentences on a marble stair, "Go before you sleep," and had pressed into her mind, without seeming to, the way a man does who has planned a thing and dares not be seen to plan it, that the garden door would be off the latch at 10, and the dowager took her drops at 9, and slept like the stone she resembled. The garden was all jasmine again, that same pouring sweetness, and Cordelia's throat closed on it. The lantern by the terrace was lit, and under it, waiting, one dark shape against the pale stone, stood the Duke of Ravenscroft in his shirt-sleeves, with no coat and no cravat, and the correct grey stillness entirely gone from him. "You found it," he said. It was not a question. He had read her face across the dark garden the way he had read it across the ballroom. "I found it." She came up the shallow steps and stood close enough to see that his eyes were red-rimmed with a sleepless day. The register and his letter both, sewn in the harp, exactly as you said. Julian, his name came out of her before she could stop it, and she saw it go into him. You planned this. Petch, and the door on the latch, and the hour. You have been helping me all day from inside a house that watches your every breath. Why? Tell me the true why, not the terrace why. You are betrothed. You marry her in September. If I stand up with these papers, I unmake everything you are selling yourself to save. For a moment the fountain talked to itself in the dark, and the moth found the lantern, and tapped. "Come inside," he said. "She is awake." She has been awake since 4, when Petch's message reached her men, and her men reached her. I told you she is quicker than you, and better funded. And I was right. She knows the harp is found. She does not know you have it. She is sitting in the blue room in the dark, waiting to be told her men have burned it. His jaw worked. Let us go and tell her something else instead. Together, that is the true why, Cordelia. I am done being silent, and I find I would rather be unmade beside you than kept whole beside her. The blue morning room was a night room now, one branch of candles burning, and the summer fire kept up in the grate against the chill of the old woman's blood. The Dowager Duchess sat in her small gilt throne exactly as she had that morning, upright, composed, the great grey stone rising and falling slow upon her breast, and, in the shadow by the window, primrose gone to grey in the dimness, stood Lady Sophia, her white hands folded, her mild eyes bright with a wakefulness that had nothing sweet left in it at all. "So," said the dowager, as the door opened. "He has fetched her in through the garden like a poacher. My men are turning over a music seller's shop in Great Marlborough Street even now, Ravenscroft, and finding an empty harp and an old fool who will not answer them. And I am to sit here and understand from your faces that I have been outrun by a girl in dusty boots and a grandson I raised to know better." She did not raise her voice. "Show me, then. You did not come here to gloat with empty hands. Show me the thing my son wrote, that I have wanted these 25 years, and let us have done." Cordelia crossed the pale carpet, past the ghost of the morning's tea stain, scrubbed but faintly there, and she did not put the papers into the old woman's reaching hand. She laid them on the marquetry desk, in the pool of candlelight, and stepped back, so that all four of them stood looking down at the oiled silk and the yellowed leaf and the bold, warm, careless hand. "Read it aloud, Julian," Cordelia said. "You told me on the stair you were tired to the marrow of silence. Then break it. Read your uncle's letter in your grandmother's hearing, and let this house hear, once, the thing it was built to bury." And the Duke of Ravenscroft picked up his uncle's letter, and in a voice that shook and did not stop for shaking, he read it. "My dearest Mary, do not let them make you small. She is a Ravenscroft as much as ever I was, and no summer fire nor cold old woman shall unmake her. Keep her safe." The candle flames leaned and straightened. The old woman sat very still, while her lost son's voice came out of her grandson's mouth across a quarter of a century. And Cordelia, watching her, because she could not help it, saw the marble face do the thing it had begun to do that morning, and mastered, saw it hesitate, saw the clean cold lines of it shiver, saw one gloved hand rise from the grey silk lap and press, briefly, flat against the breastbone above the stone, as though to hold something in that had slipped its moorings. It was gone in a breath. But Cordelia had seen it, and she understood, with a pity she did not want, and could not refuse, that the woman who had spent a dukedom keeping her small had loved the man who wrote that letter, and had lost him to a fever in a rented Lisbon room before she could forgive him for the music master's daughter, and had been fighting his ghost ever since through the body of his child. "Enough," the dowager said. "But it came out thin." "No," said Julian, "not nearly enough. 4 years you set me to guard this. 4 years I called it duty." He set the letter down, gently, beside the register leaf. "I will not marry to bury my own cousin. Grandmother, look at her. She has your son's jaw. I have watched you flinch from it since she walked in this morning." It was Sophia who moved. Sophia who came away from the window at last, quick and low, and reached for the papers on the desk with one white darting hand. And Cordelia caught her wrist before the fingers closed, and held it, and the two young women stood locked over the candle with the letter between them. "Let go of me," Sophia breathed, and the sugar was all gone now. Underneath it was something flat and hard and frightened. "You little nobody. Do you know what you are pulling down? 2 years of my father's patience. A settlement half the ton would ruin themselves for. Let go, or I will see your aunt in the street by Michaelmas. I swear it before God. I will. You will do nothing to my aunt," Cordelia said, "because you will have nothing left to threaten her with." She did not tighten her grip. She loosened it and let the girl's wrist go, and Sophia stumbled back a step with her empty hand. "The bans cannot be read on a lie, Lady Sophia. And there is no lie left. Everyone in this room knows what I am now. You cannot marry a man to silence a secret that has already been spoken aloud. You can only marry him to his own misery, and yours, and I do not think, whatever you have let this house make of you, that you want a husband who read another woman's father's letter with his voice breaking while you clutched at his sleeve." Sophia looked at the Duke. She looked at him for a long moment, and Cordelia watched the cold, quick arithmetic run behind the mild blue eyes, the rope gone slack, the impossibility of drawing it in, The calculation of where a clever girl salvages her dignity from the wreck of an advantageous match. "No," Sophia said at last, softly, to no one. "No, I do not." She drew herself up and smoothed the primrose muslin, and became again, by an act of will Cordelia could not help but respect, a painting of a serene young lady. "My father will make it a broken engagement of my choosing. I will not have it said I was thrown over for a squire's, for a music master's granddaughter. You will grant me that, Julian, in exchange for my silence, which you will find, once I am out of this house, is worth a great deal more to you than my fortune ever was." She moved to the door. There she stopped and looked back, not at the Duke but at Cordelia, and something almost like a real expression crossed her face. "You held my wrist," she said, instead of the paper. "I would have taken the paper. Perhaps that is the difference between us, and perhaps it is why you win. Good night." The door closed behind her, very quietly. It was, Cordelia thought, the most graceful surrender she had ever seen from someone who had lost. Then there were three of them, and the candle, and the fire in the summer grate, and the two yellowed papers on the desk that had cost a girl her whole life, and were about to buy it back. The Dowager Duchess of Ravenscroft rose from her gilt throne. She did it slowly, this time, without the effortless certainty of the ballroom or the morning. She rose like an old woman rising, one hand on the chair arm, and she crossed to the desk and stood over her son's letter and did not touch it. "You may burn it, if you like," Cordelia said. "There it lies. One motion and I am nobody again. And your name is safe, and you have won after all. I put it within your reach on purpose, Your Grace, so that you should have the choosing of it, and not be able to tell yourself afterward that it was taken from you." The old woman looked at her, and for the first time the pale, flat eyes held something Cordelia could not name. Not warmth. The woman had no warmth, but a kind of terrible, clear-sighted respect. The respect of one strategist for another, across a board, finally lost. "Your mother," the Dowager said, "did exactly that. Laid a thing within my reach and made me choose. She offered me the marriage lines, that first day, across this very desk, offered to put them in the fire herself, with her own hand, if I would only let her stay, and let the child be raised in this house as what it was. And I would not. I chose the fire I could light myself, in Somerset, slowly, over 25 years. She looked down at the letter. I told myself it was for the name. I have had a long night to sit with how much of it was for the wound." Her gloved hand came out and rested, at last, flat upon the desk beside the paper. Not taking it, not burning it. Choosing not to. Letting them both see the choice, exactly as her grandson had let Cordelia see his on the marble stair. "I am too old to light another fire, and I find I have lost the taste for this one. Keep your papers, miss." She stopped. Her jaw did the thing again, and steadied. "Keep them, Cordelia. You have your father's obstinacy, and your mother's grace, and my own hard head. And God help the family. There is no untelling it now." She drew from her breast a small folded paper of her own. Cordelia had not seen her take it up, and laid it in the candlelight beside the letter and the register leaf, and turned it face up with one finger so the words showed. It was a single line in the elegant engraved hand Cordelia knew from a note pressed all night against her wrist. "I acknowledge Cordelia, daughter of my son Edmund, as of my blood and my house, Augusta, Duchess of Ravenscroft. I wrote it at 5 this morning," the old woman said, "when I still believed my men would reach the harp first, and I would be able to tear it up again by noon. They did not. So it stands. Read it, and then we shall none of us ever have to speak of this in the small hours again." Cordelia picked it up. She read the one line twice, and her hand was steady now, and she set it down among the others. "Thank you," she said. It was not the word she had expected to give this woman, and it cost her, and she gave it anyway. Because grace answering cruelty was the only weapon she had ever truly owned, and she was not going to lay it down in the hour it had finally won. They were married in the autumn, when the leaves turned, quietly, in a village church in Kent, in the parish of Wexham. Because Cordelia had asked for it, and Julian had understood without being told, and the dowager had said only that it was a sentimental choice and precisely what her son would have made, and had come, in slate-grey satin, and sat very upright in the front pew, and had been seen, by a niece who watched her all through the vows, to press one gloved hand once, briefly, flat against the breastbone above her pearls. And the following June, when the jasmine came out again along 100 London balustrades, and the season filled the streets with carriages, there was a small evening party at Ravenscroft House. Not a crush, not a ball. Only 40 of the people who mattered, and a great many more who wished they had, and at the far end of the long drawing-room, where the tall windows stood open to the warm green dark and the scent of the garden poured in, there stood a small single-action harp with a wreath of green leaves painted round its soundboard, mended, restrung, its lining sewn shut again over nothing at all, for what it had guarded now hung framed in the library, where any guest might read it. Cordelia, the Duchess of Ravenscroft, though she still turned, half a beat late, when the title was spoken, sat down to it as the last of the light went blue in the windows, and set her hands to the strings her mother had not touched in a quarter of a century, and played. She had learned again over the winter, her fingers remembering what her girlhood had half known before the men came and carried the music out the door. It was not flawless. It did not need to be. It filled the warm room and went out through the open windows into the jasmine, and the 40 people who mattered fell silent to hear it, and this time the silence had no cruelty in it anywhere. Julian came to stand beside her as she played, close, his hand resting on the carved shoulder of the harp, a breath from her own, not touching, choosing not to, letting her see the choice, which had become their oldest and dearest joke, the whole language of a man who had once refused a hand in a ballroom because he did not trust himself to give it back. "You know," he murmured, under the music so only she could hear, "there is a dowager in the third chair from the fire watching us, with an expression of profound disapproval. And I have it on the best authority she told my grandmother at dinner that a duchess who plays her own harp at her own party is very nearly as vulgar as a duke who says a young lady's name across a ballroom." "And what did your grandmother say to that?" Cordelia asked, her fingers moving. "She said," Julian answered, and she heard the smile come into his voice at last, warm and unhurried, and entirely his own, that the girl had learned to make grace look like insolence, and that it was the most dangerous thing she had taught anybody in 50 years, and that on the whole she was glad to have done it before she got too old to enjoy the result. His hand settled, finally, over Cordelia's on the harp's frame, warm and certain, no longer choosing to keep away. "Play the end of it," he said. "They are all holding their breath. Do not let them off too easily." So she played the end of it, and held the last note a moment past what was necessary, the way she had once held a curtsy, so that the whole bright room had to wait on her grace before it was released, and then she let it go, into the summer night, into the jasmine, into the house that had been built on a secret with her name in it, and had at last been made to give the name back.